So I'm going to talk about a few sections of the benefits between Coast Guard Reserve and Coast Guard Auxiliary. I'm only going to be discussing the 3-year Reserve Coast Guard contract. The 6-year contract is more closer to what you get from active duty. And what's the time check? All right, it's almost 11:25. So anyway, Coast Guard Reserve, you get base access and full tax-free shopping privileges. You can buy all uniforms on the exchanges, along with groceries and everything else. You get identical privileges in the auxiliary. It's easier to get retirement and get continued base access. It's harder if you're a reservist to retire and get base access without doing your 20. I guess you might still get base access. I'm not 100% sure, but it's hard to get retirement. Now the shopping is basically identical, except auxiliary can't buy alcohol or tobacco on base, at least without paying taxes for it. Coast Guard Auxiliary, yeah, it's a pretty good deal. Coast Guard Reserve gets those things. You get same access to the gym. Child care is a little more restricted to, in most cases, just reserve and active duty, but in some cases it could potentially go to auxiliary. Medical care is basically restricted just to active duty and reserve. Auxiliary don't really benefit from that. They certainly don't get health insurance, but that's a next topic. Healthcare. You don't get any from the auxiliary. You get a very good plan from the reserves and active duty, but we're only really discussing reserves. All right, that's kind of simple. You basically pays for your whole family for next to nothing. If you have a family, if you're a single person, you get dental, health, everything for free. You might not get to choose all your own doctors, but you get everything for free. And you might have to pay for a few things out of pocket, but you're basically covered on insurance. It's a good deal. Auxiliary, you don't get that, unfortunately. Some people think we should have healthcare for free, and there are a few places that are trying to go that direction within the United States, such as Massachusetts and Vermont and California, but if you don't live in those states, that doesn't really affect you. All right, so the next benefit is, all right, we're going to talk about banking next. So, contrary to popular opinion, in the reserves, for 3 years, you don't get access to the VA home loan. You have to be active duty or serve 6 years. Also, the VA home loan only covers up to $450,000. They offer no down payment instead of covering your down payment, and it's interest-free. But there's some residency requirements. Versus Navy Federal is a great credit union that you get access to just being a dependent, a contractor of the Navy, an auxiliarist, or a reservist. Now, it's a good deal, but reserves and auxiliary both get the same basic benefits from the credit union. It's a little cheaper as far as interest rates go on mortgages than a regular bank is. It's a big credit union, so it's kind of trustworthy. Other credit unions are more likely to falter even if they're FDIC insured. Smaller credit unions can still provide great custom services, so maybe you'd still want to bank with them. But for your home loan, you might prefer Navy Federal because it's a little bit cheaper. You don't pay closing costs, so they can save you some money. And they're potentially more likely to work with you on getting a mortgage. You also have access to the Pentagon Credit Union, which might be cool. I don't know how that one works, though. All right, so the next big one is pay. Auxiliaries are volunteer only, don't get paid, but their expenses can be written off for certain taxes in some ways more easily than it would be for reservists. Reservists, on the other hand, get paid $200 to $400 a month on average for enlisted, depending on the rank and rate in some cases, and officer about $400 to $700 depending on rank and rate. Well, really mainly rank, but occasionally rate can factor in. Though I don't have the whole pricing chart, and I haven't really looked at going military versus civilian side. All right, so you're a civilian volunteer, classification, civilian volunteer. You are a civilian volunteer in the auxiliary. Sorry, I just repeated myself. Versus you are a military member in the reserve who works part-time. Work schedules. Work schedules. You do 1 weekend a month in reserves, 2 weeks in the summer. In auxiliary, you don't have to do the 2 weeks. You just do one meeting 1 day a week. It could be a weekend or it could be on a weekday. You meet for usually about 2 hours, and you have commuting time in both, so that's about the same. It might be a little closer, though, as far as commuting time. You can just budget about a quarter to half your day going to the auxiliary meeting, just between commuting time and everything, unless you live right next to base or you're a dependent who lives on base. Then maybe it's just an eighth of your day. But yeah, just kind of assume it's going to take up a large chunk of your day. But it's still, like a quarter or an eighth the time commitment that you'd have to commit in the reserve. So it's not a bad deal if you're thinking about the benefits you get compared to what you have to put in. All right. The reserves might make fiscal sense as far as an actual job. You get access to all these veteran benefits, you get access to health care, you get money. I mean, not really a lot of money, but you get some pocket money. It's not the reason to do it, it's just a privilege and a perk. You lose a lot of that to commuting, though, if you have to go far. But the biggest difference is the auxiliary. You get some perks that might be worth doing it, maybe not, but it's mainly about service. And you will have to do service no matter what you do in the military or public service, but you are going to do more. It's more about serving your community in the auxiliary and the pride and the honor than it is about money. Because healthcare is so expensive, you can actually make a small profit in the reserves, and access to guaranteed healthcare, it can even be life-saving, so that can be really worth doing for that reason alone. And we can have the whole conversation, I mean, ideally everyone would have healthcare somehow, but I don't want to get into the politics, because that's not in the scope of this channel. But yes, having healthcare can be a life-saving event, so that could be worth doing solely for that reason. Okay. The only other big stuff to talk about is discounts and veteran hiring preference. So discounts, basically the same thing. People don't really care. You're a first responder and a member of the military or a ceremonial member of the Coast Guard. If you're in the auxiliary, it's basically the same thing. If you're in uniform or you show an ID, you get discounts. You get treated like you served in the military, and there's so few of you guys compared to military people. Most employers will just act as if you're in the military for their benefit system. You shouldn't say you were in the military. You should just say I'm in the Coast Guard Auxiliary, but most will be like, all right, Coast Guard, yeah, I heard you, check the box. Yeah, we're just going to treat you as if you're military. That's TD Bank's policy. I spoke to one of their hiring managers at a career fair at my school, and they're like, yeah, we don't care if you're technically military. If you have guard or reserve duty, or you get called in for an emergency as a first responder, even if you don't technically have to go, we just excuse you from work. We don't care. So that's kind of, most employers have a policy like that. Yeah, that's pretty good. Auxiliary doesn't get veteran hiring preferences, though it can help in some cases with private sector employment, and certain municipal and state government offices could potentially consider Coast Guard Auxiliary helpful experience. It shows you volunteer in your community, so that's good. It can potentially count for community service hours for colleges or graduate school, but that's school by school. You might be able to get it registered as an internship for credit in your school, but that's unlikely, but possible. Yes, that's possible. Yeah, I don't know what else there is to say, really. Auxiliary, you do what you can. You go to the meetings every month. I think you can miss one or two a year. And you volunteer, you help out your community, you make it stronger. But it's, about serving the auxiliary and serving your community and country, and to a lesser extent, all mariners of the sea. Coast Guard Reserve, it's a part-time job that can become a full-time job at the request of the Coast Guard or the Navy or the President. You basically serve the country on a reserve schedule, but in the event of an emergency, natural disaster, or if they ever want to draft the Coast Guard into the Navy, you are basically just called up and you have to do it. Auxiliary is show up when you have to, and when you want to. You don't really have to show up except for the meetings. If you can't show up, that's okay. You say you're going to be somewhere, you're really supposed to show up, but otherwise you're free to not do events unless you're told this is a flotilla-wide event, you have to go. And you can't be like court-martialed, really. You can only just be dishonorably disenrolled, versus you can technically go to prison for not going to your orders location, the Coast Guard Reserve. But what would probably just happen is you'd probably just be dishonorably discharged in most cases, unless it was like a war, which is worse, but it's not that much worse. I mean, you don't have to do boot camp and auxiliary, you just do something kind of like a light AIT, a diet AIT, and in the reserve you have to do boot camp and AIT, which is either pro or con, depending on your view. The biggest difference really is the health exemptions. Like, you can be over 100 and still join the auxiliary. You can be in a wheelchair and still join the auxiliary. You can be blind and still join the auxiliary in most cases. You can be, I mean, you won't be able to do every job or every rate in the auxiliary, but you can still do a lot of stuff in the auxiliary. You can still help out our mission. You can do recruiting, fundraising, administrative work if you're blind or in a wheelchair or 100 years old. You can still do a lot of stuff. You can't do any Coast Guard regular jobs in the military side. Now, you might be able to do civilian employment for the Coast Guard, be a military civilian, but that's a different conversation. And that's a different video. I don't really know much about that. So yeah, it's basically the same situation. Coast Guard Reserve versus Coast Guard Auxiliary. It's kind of the same situation, but you get different perks, different work expectations, and you get more monetary perks in the reserve, including a paycheck, a small paycheck, albeit, and the auxiliary is mainly about community service and serving mariners, and the honor, because you get a lot of honor and pride in wearing the uniform and being in the service. Whether you're reserve, auxiliary, active duty, military, civilian, whatever you are, you get a lot of pride.